My parents banned my 5-year-old daughter from Christmas, claiming she was too disruptive for their perfect family gathering. But when I arrived unannounced to drop off forgotten medication, I found my brother's twin boys surrounded by mountains of expensive gifts while my little girl wasn't even mentioned in their holiday plans. What happened next changed our family forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Cassandra Holloway, and I'm 34 years old. I live in the coastal town of Millbrook Harbor with my daughter Juniper, who just turned 5 last month. Juniper is my whole world, a bright, energetic little girl with wild auburn curls and an infectious laugh that can light up any room. She's also autistic, which means she experiences the world differently than most people. To me, her unique perspective makes her absolutely perfect. To my parents, Reginald and Beatrice Whitmore, she's an embarrassment they'd rather hide. Growing up in Millbrook Harbor, I was always the family rebel. While my younger brother Nathaniel followed every rule and exceeded every expectation, I questioned authority, pursued art instead of business, and generally refused to fit into the pristine mold my parents had crafted for their children. When I got pregnant at 28 with Juniper, unmarried and from a brief relationship that didn't work out, my parents' disappointment reached new heights. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for how they would treat my innocent daughter. From the moment Juniper was born, the difference in treatment was stark. My parents, who lived in the affluent Crescent Hill neighborhood of Millbrook Harbor, would visit occasionally but always seemed uncomfortable around her. When Juniper was diagnosed with autism at age 3, their discomfort transformed into something much uglier: shame. They began making excuses about why they couldn't babysit, why family gatherings needed to be quiet affairs, and why maybe it would be better for everyone if Juniper and I didn't attend certain events. Meanwhile, my brother Nathaniel had married his college sweetheart, Penelope, and they'd had twin boys, 7-year-old Jasper and Julian. These boys could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Every minor achievement was celebrated, every sporting event was attended with enthusiasm, and every school project was displayed prominently on my mother's refrigerator. The contrast was heartbreaking, but I told myself it didn't matter. Juniper had me, and my love was enough. I work as a freelance graphic designer, running my small business from our cozy cottage on Seaview Lane. It's not glamorous, but it allows me the flexibility to be present for Juniper's therapy appointments, school meetings, and all the extra support she needs. My parents never understood why I didn't pursue something more substantial, as they put it. Nathaniel, on the other hand, had followed their blueprint perfectly: MBA from Thornfield University, executive position at Meridian Financial Group, beautiful home in the same exclusive neighborhood where we grew up. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Birthday parties for Jasper and Julian were elaborate affairs with hired entertainers, custom cakes, and guest lists that read like a who's who of Millbrook Harbor's elite. When Juniper's birthdays came around, my parents would send a card with a modest check and make excuses about being too busy to attend. "Maybe next year will be less hectic," became my mother's standard refrain. Family dinners were exercises in patience. My parents would spend hours discussing Jasper's soccer achievements or Julian's academic performance, while any mention of Juniper's progress in speech therapy or her artistic talents was met with polite but disinterested nods. When Juniper would have a meltdown, a normal part of her autism that we'd learned to handle with patience and understanding, my parents would exchange those looks. The ones that said everything without words. The breaking point had been building for months. Small slights, forgotten invitations, and increasingly obvious attempts to exclude us from family events. But I never imagined they would stoop so low as to ban a 5-year-old child from Christmas. The conversation that changed everything happened on a frigid December evening, just 2 weeks before Christmas Day. I had been excited because, for once, my mother Beatrice had called to discuss holiday plans in advance rather than her usual last-minute invitations. "Cassandra, dear," she'd said in that carefully modulated voice she used when delivering unpleasant news, "your father and I have been discussing Christmas arrangements." My heart had lifted with hope. Perhaps this year would be different. Perhaps they were ready to embrace Juniper fully into the family celebration. "We're planning a very special gathering this year," she continued. "Nathaniel and Penelope will be bringing the boys, and we've invited the Ashfords, You remember them, don't you? They're considering Nathaniel for a partnership position. The Ashfords were old family friends and influential members of Millbrook Harbor Society. I could already sense where this conversation was heading, but I tried to stay positive. That sounds lovely, Mom. What time should Juniper and I arrive? The pause that followed lasted an eternity. Well, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. This gathering is quite important for Nathaniel's career prospects, and we need everything to be perfect. You understand? No, I don't understand. What are you saying? Juniper can be unpredictable. And with such important guests, we can't risk any disruptions. Perhaps it would be better if you celebrated separately this year. The words hit me like a physical blow. You're uninviting my 5-year-old daughter from Christmas because you're ashamed of her? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Don't be dramatic, Cassandra. It's just one Christmas. There will be plenty of others. But I knew better. There wouldn't be plenty of others. This was my parents drawing a line in the sand, choosing their social standing and Nathaniel's career over their own granddaughter's feelings. As I hung up the phone that night, something inside me shifted. I was done protecting my parents' feelings at the expense of my daughter's emotional well-being. What I discovered 2 weeks later, on Christmas Eve itself, would expose the true depth of their favoritism and set in motion events that would finally force our family to confront the truth they'd been avoiding for years. The favoritism in our family wasn't something that developed gradually, it was apparent from the moment Juniper took her first breath. I remember holding my newborn daughter in the maternity ward at Millbrook General Hospital, exhausted but filled with overwhelming love, when my parents arrived for their first visit. The contrast between their reaction to Juniper and their response to my brother's twins 3 years earlier was impossible to ignore. When Jasper and Julian were born, my mother Beatrice had spent weeks beforehand preparing the perfect nursery at her house, complete with matching cribs, designer mobiles, and enough baby clothes to outfit triplets. She'd taken a leave of absence from her volunteer work at the Millbrook Harbor Historical Society to help Penelope with the transition. My father Reginald had immediately started college funds and began planning their future educations at prestigious institutions. But when Juniper arrived, the response was markedly different. My parents showed up to the hospital empty-handed except for a single bouquet of flowers from the gift shop downstairs. They stayed for exactly 20 minutes, making polite but distant conversation about the weather and hospital food while avoiding looking directly at my daughter for more than a few seconds at a time. She's quite red, isn't she? My mother had remarked, as if this was somehow unusual for a newborn. All babies are red when they're first born, Mom, I'd replied, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. My father had checked his expensive Cartwright watch twice during their brief visit. We should let you rest, Cassandra. Recovery is important. They left with promises to check in soon that felt hollow even as they spoke them. The differences only became more pronounced as Juniper grew. My parents' house on Elmwood Avenue had always been a showcase of family photos, but the distribution told a story of clear favoritism. The main hallway featured a progression of professional portraits of Jasper and Julian at various ages, their first steps, kindergarten graduations, Little League victories, school plays. These weren't casual snapshots, they were expensive studio photographs in elegant frames, arranged with museum-level precision. Juniper's photos, when they appeared at all, were relegated to less prominent spaces. A single picture on the refrigerator, tucked behind shopping lists and appointment cards. One small frame on a side table in the guest room that hardly anyone ever entered. Even when I provided beautiful professional photos of Juniper, the same photographer who had captured countless images of the twins, they somehow never made it to the main display areas. The gift disparities were perhaps the most painful to witness. For birthdays and holidays, Jasper and Julian received elaborate presents that demonstrated thoughtful consideration and significant financial investment. When Julian expressed interest in astronomy, my parents bought him a professional-grade telescope and enrolled him in the junior astronomer program at the Millbrook Planetarium. When Jasper mentioned wanting to learn guitar, they purchased a high-quality instrument and arranged for private lessons with the city's most respected music teacher. Juniper's gifts, by comparison, were generic and impersonal. toys clearly purchased at the last minute from whatever store happened to be convenient. Books selected without any consideration of her interests or developmental needs. When she went through a phase of fascination with butterflies, I mentioned it to my mother, hoping she might incorporate this interest into her next gift selection. Instead, Juniper received a generic doll that had nothing to do with nature or her current passions. The most heartbreaking disparity was in time and attention. My parents attended every significant event in the twins' lives with enthusiastic participation. Soccer games, school concerts, art shows, science fairs, they were always there with cameras, cheering from the sidelines, and bragging to anyone who would listen about their grandson's achievements. But when Juniper reached her first developmental milestones, their interest was minimal. Her first words, first steps, first day of preschool, these moments passed with barely an acknowledgement from her grandparents. When she was accepted into the specialized early intervention program at Brookstone Academy, an achievement that required months of evaluation and waiting lists, my parents' response was a distracted, "That's nice, dear," during a phone conversation primarily focused on Julian's latest soccer tournament. The autism diagnosis at age 3 marked a turning point in their behavior. What had been subtle favoritism became overt avoidance. My parents, who prided themselves on their social standing in Millbrook Harbor's elite circles, seemed unable to reconcile having a granddaughter who didn't fit their image of perfection. "Have you considered special schools?" my mother had asked delicately after Juniper's diagnosis, as if autism was a shameful secret that needed to be hidden away. "She's thriving in her current program," I'd explained. "Her teachers say she's incredibly bright and creative. She just processes information differently." Of course, my mother had replied, but her tone suggested she didn't really understand or want to understand. The social implications became clear during family gatherings. My parents would orchestrate seating arrangements that placed Juniper at the far end of the table, away from their important guests. When she would engage in stemming behaviors that helped her regulate her emotions, hand flapping or rocking, my mother would shoot me meaningful looks that clearly communicated her disapproval. "Can't you make her stop that?" she whispered during one particularly painful family dinner when the Cromwells, another prominent Millbrook Harbor family, were visiting. "She's not doing anything wrong," I'd replied firmly. "This is how she processes sensory input. It's perfectly normal for her." But normal wasn't what my parents wanted. They wanted the kind of grandchildren they could showcase at the country club, brag about at charity galas, and use as evidence of their family's success and sophistication. The twins, with their neurotypical development, athletic abilities, and academic achievements, fit perfectly into this vision. Juniper, with her unique needs and different way of experiencing the world, represented everything my parents couldn't control or curate about their family image. As Juniper grew older and more aware of these differences, I watched her begin to internalize the message that she somehow wasn't good enough for her grandparents' love. She would ask why Grandpa and Grandmama never wanted to play with her like they did with her cousins. She wondered aloud why they never seemed excited to see her drawings or hear about her day. Breaking my daughter's heart wasn't something I was willing to tolerate, not even for the sake of family peace. But I had no idea how deep the favoritism ran until that devastating Christmas Eve discovery that would change everything between us forever. The financial disparity between how my parents treated their grandchildren became impossible to ignore as the children grew older. While I struggled as a single mother working freelance jobs to make ends meet in our modest cottage, my parents lavished expensive opportunities on Jasper and Julian without a second thought. When the twins turned 6, my parents enrolled them in Millbrook Harbor's most exclusive private school, Ashworth Preparatory Academy, where tuition alone cost more than I made in half a year. The school was known for its rigorous academic programs, state-of-the-art facilities, and connections to the most prestigious universities in the country. My parents didn't just pay the tuition, they also covered uniforms, textbooks, extracurricular activities, and even hired private tutors to ensure the boys maintained their academic edge. Meanwhile, when it came time for Juniper to start school, my requests for financial assistance were met with vague excuses and suggestions that public school would be perfectly adequate for her needs. Millbrook Elementary was a decent school, but it lacked the specialized resources that could have helped Juniper thrive. I spent countless hours advocating for appropriate accommodations, fighting for speech therapy services, and researching programs that might better serve her unique learning style. Have you looked into the scholarship programs? My mother suggested when I mentioned the challenges Juniper was facing in her current educational environment. Surely there are resources available for children like her. The phrase, children like her, stung every time she said it, as if Juniper belonged to some separate category that didn't warrant the same investment as her neurotypical cousins. I had indeed researched scholarships and grants, spending late nights filling out applications and writing essays about Juniper's potential. But the competition was fierce, and most programs had waiting lists that stretched for years. The extracurricular disparities were equally stark. Jasper and Julian were enrolled in every activity that caught their interest: tennis lessons at the exclusive Millbrook Harbor Country Club, sailing classes at the prestigious Harborview Yacht Club, piano instruction with a former conservatory professor, and art classes at the renowned Meridian Arts Center. Their schedules were packed with enriching experiences that cost thousands of dollars each semester. When Juniper expressed interest in art classes after seeing some of Julian's work displayed prominently on my parents' refrigerator, I approached my mother about the possibility of enrolling her in a program suitable for her age and abilities. Art classes can be quite expensive, my mother replied, despite having just written a check for Julian's private sailing lessons the week before. Perhaps you could find something more budget-friendly. There might be community center programs. I did find a wonderful adaptive arts program at the Millbrook Community Center that specialized in working with children who had different learning needs. The instructor, Mrs. Delacroix, was patient and creative, helping Juniper express herself through various mediums while building her confidence. But when Juniper excitedly showed her grandparents a painting she'd created, a vibrant butterfly garden that demonstrated remarkable attention to detail and color coordination, their reaction was lukewarm at best. "That's very colorful," my father commented, barely glancing at the artwork before turning his attention back to Julian's latest academic achievement report. The social exclusions became more pronounced as the children grew older and family gatherings became more elaborate affairs. My parents' dinner parties and holiday celebrations were carefully orchestrated events designed to impress their social circle and reinforce their status in Millbrook Harbor society. These gatherings featured the finest china, professionally catered meals, and guest lists that read like a directory of the town's most influential families. During these events, Jasper and Julian were presented as the perfect grandchildren, well-dressed, articulate, and trained to perform on command. They would recite poems they'd memorized, demonstrate their musical abilities, or engage in sophisticated conversations with adult guests who praised their intelligence and poise. My parents beamed with pride during these performances, clearly relishing the admiration their grandsons received from their friends. Juniper, when she was included at all, was expected to remain quietly in the background. If she exhibited any behaviors that my parents deemed inappropriate, stemming to self-regulate, asking repetitive questions about topics that interested her, or becoming overwhelmed by the sensory input of large gatherings, I would receive sharp looks and whispered requests to handle the situation. During one particularly painful Thanksgiving dinner, Juniper had become fascinated by the intricate pattern on my mother's antique serving platter. She was gently tracing the design with her finger, a behavior that helped her process the visual input and find calm in what was becoming an overwhelming sensory environment. The gesture was completely harmless and actually demonstrated her appreciation for beautiful craftsmanship. "Cassandra," my mother hissed from across the table, "please stop her from doing that. The Pembertons are watching." The Pembertons were longtime family friends whose opinion my parents valued highly. I watched as my mother's face flushed with embarrassment, as if Juniper's innocent behavior was somehow reflecting poorly on the entire family's reputation. "She's not hurting anything," I replied quietly, placing a protective hand on Juniper's shoulder. "She's just appreciating the beautiful pattern." "It's not appropriate," my father interjected, his voice carrying the authority he'd used when disciplining me as a child. "She needs to learn proper behavior in social situations." The message was clear: Juniper's natural behaviors, the very traits that made her uniquely herself, were seen as defects that needed to be corrected or hidden. The unconditional acceptance and celebration that Jasper and Julian received was never extended to my daughter. The educational disparity became even more apparent when it came time for special programs and opportunities. When Julian showed an aptitude for mathematics, my parents immediately enrolled him in an advanced summer program at Thornfield University, the same prestigious institution where Nathaniel had earned his MBA. The program cost $3,000 for 2 weeks, but they paid without hesitation and even bought him specialized equipment and textbooks. When Juniper's teacher mentioned that she had shown exceptional artistic ability and recommended a specialized summer camp for children with autism who demonstrated creative talents, my parents' response was dramatically different. 3 weeks seems like a long time, my mother mused when I mentioned the program. And quite expensive for what amounts to summer daycare. The program wasn't daycare, it was a carefully designed therapeutic and educational experience that combined artistic expression with social skills development and sensory integration therapy. It was exactly what Juniper needed to build confidence and develop her natural talents. But unlike Julian's academic enrichment, which was immediately recognized as a valuable investment, Juniper's program was dismissed as an unnecessary expense. I ended up working extra hours for months, taking on additional freelance projects and selling some of my own art pieces to afford the tuition. Watching Juniper flourish in that environment, seeing her confidence grow as she worked alongside other children who understood her perspective, made every sacrifice worthwhile. But it also highlighted how different her path would be without the financial support that her cousins took for granted. The pattern was consistent across every aspect of their childhood experiences. Quality healthcare, educational opportunities, extracurricular activities, family vacations. The twins received the best of everything while Juniper's needs were treated as optional extras that I should manage on my own. This systematic exclusion and devaluation of my daughter wasn't just about money or convenience. It was about fundamental